Salute family, this is blacktruthunited. I stumbled across something that I found very disturbing, and I wanted to show it to you so you can be aware of what's going on and what's happening to these new generations. Some of you may be looking at Gen Z or Gen Alpha and saying, why are these new generations obsessed with pronouns and tampons and bathrooms? And in this video I'm going to break down at least a small sector in academia that has been insidiously targeted in order to push certain agendas in our community. Now, for those who are watching this video, you are probably familiar with Elder Neely Fullers, but I'm going to play a clip from him before I drill into this particular topic regarding definitions and how academia is playing with these definitions and changing them over time.
So let's look at the definitions. See, that's what I mean by the use of words, and that's why I recommend that people read the textbook for victims of racism. Then they can understand how I'm using words. You use language so that you purify everything that you say. And nobody can contest what you're saying. Why? Because it's based on logic. Based on logic. Everything that you say should be based on logic. You just don't throw words out there and say that they mean something or another. Because if you do that, you got what? Confusion.
Now that is the great Elder Neely Fullers. So as you can see, definitions are very important when it comes to understanding the system of white supremacy and combating it. And I also want to remind you of the Willie Lynch Letter. Now, whether you believe it's real or not, there's no doubt that the Willie Lynch Letter has extremely pertinent detail that we can analyze, if nothing else, on a surface level. You know, language is a peculiar institution. It leads to the heart of a people. The more a foreigner knows about the language of another country, the more he is able to move through all levels of that society. Therefore, if a foreigner is an enemy of the country, to the extent that he knows the body of the language, to that extent is the country vulnerable to attack or invasion of a foreign culture. For example, if you teach him all about your language, he will know all your secrets, and he is no more a slave, for you can't fool him any longer. For example, if you told a slave that he must perform in getting out our crops, and he knows the language well, he would know that our crops didn't mean our crops, and the slavery system would break down, for he would relate on the basis of what our crops really meant. So you have to be careful in setting up the new language for the slaves would soon be in your house, talking to you man to man, and that is death to our economic system. In addition, the definitions of words are only a minute part of the process. What I find interesting is that most of this whole section is dealing with definitions, but then it says right here that the definitions are only a minute part of the process. It seems like a little bit of a contradiction, but the core is here. Controlling the language is extremely important in order to control a people. And when you control those definitions and keep the definitions changing and overlapping and doing intersections and all this kind of nonsense, you're able to control a people very easily. And that brings me to the case study of the word homophobia. Now, I originally was looking up this word for something else in order to prove a point, but the definition that I stumbled upon was so whack that I decided to take screenshots and everything to show what's going on. So let's break down the word homophobia. We're going to start with the suffix phobia. And a phobia is a type of anxiety disorder that causes an individual to experience extreme, irrational fear about a situation, living creature, place, or object. So that's phobia. Interesting. Let's get another source. This is Cleveland Clinic. A phobia is when you have an intense or even overpowering fear and anxiety in certain situations, or when you encounter certain objects. While phobias can involve the same things as ordinary fears, the effects of phobias are more severe. In most severe cases, people with phobias critically limit their lives to avoid encountering what they fear. Keep that in mind. One more. This is coming out of Harvard Health. A phobia is a persistent, excessive, unrealistic fear of an object, person, animal, activity, or situation. It is a type of anxiety disorder. A person with a phobia either tries to avoid the thing that triggers the fear or endures it with great anxiety and distress. Pretty uniform, right? Dealing with fear, anxiety, extreme distress, avoiding things. Alright, let's look at arachnophobia, a very strong fear of spiders. Follow with me. This is very important. Claustrophobia, a fear of being in closed spaces. Both of these come from Cambridge. Now let's look at homophobia.
What? What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man. That nigga's tripping.
Harmful or unfair things a person does based on a fear or dislike of gay people, queer people, people who do not fit the society's traditional ideas about gender or sexuality.
And they even added another definition here.
Policies, behaviors, rules, etc. that result in a continued unfair advantage to straight people. Men who are attracted to women and women who are attracted to men. The unfair or harmful treatment of gay people or queer people. People who do not fit society's traditional ideas about gender or sexuality.
Now, do you see the difference here, family? Remember, anything with a phobia is dealing with just extreme fear towards something. Now, this is saying harmful or unfair things a person does. This definition doesn't make sense at all. And you can see how, if an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old is reading this, they could get very confused. It has nothing to do with what a phobia actually is. A phobia would be simply an extreme, irrational fear of gays or lesbians. Now we're going to take a look at the Wayback Machine. Am I going there? Yes, I am. And this is Cambridge. You can look at the top. This is Cambridge Dictionary. Now, if you look in the top right corner, you'll see that this definition came from 2010. And what does it say? A fear or dislike of homosexuals. Very different from that definition. From this to that. Now, while I don't agree necessarily with the dislike portion, a fear of homosexuals, that's very close to an acceptable definition. Now, let's use that Wayback Machine again. Now we're in 2015. This is Cambridge now. A fear or dislike of gay people. Pretty much the same definition. One said homosexuals, the other one says gay people. That's a realistic change for 5 years. I think saying homosexuals covered it better, but let's find out what happens when we jump to 2020. A fear or dislike of gay people. No change over 5 years. Now you're catching this, right, family? Now one would think that if the definition remained pretty much the same for 10 years, that things wouldn't change dramatically, right? Wrong. This is 2022 when some nutcase got a hold of it. And I've already read this one to you, so it's pretty much the same one that's there now. But there was only one definition at this time. They added that second definition later on. I don't know the exact date. This is something we need to look out for, family. They're changing these definitions on us. Pretty soon they'll be saying that denying sexual advance is homophobia. We're already getting to that point. Look at the case of the NBA basketball player. I think his name was LaMelo. I don't watch sports, so I don't know. But he was fined $100,000 for saying the words no homo. This thing is getting out of control. In Cambridge and these other institutions that are promoting these definition changes need to be held accountable. And while I'm at it, I want to point out this fact to you. And yes, I'm going there. Cambridge University benefited from slavery. And let's find out what type of slavery. Researchers found that fellows from Cambridge colleges were involved with the East India Company, while investors in the Royal African Company also had links to Cambridge, with both companies active in the slave trade. What type of slave trade, you may be asking? Uh-oh. In 1619, some 20 Africans arrived in Jamestown, Virginia, where they were purchased from Dutch privateers to aid in the English colony's lucrative, labor-intensive cultivation of tobacco. As profits piled up and slavery spread through the American colonies, the British Crown decided to exert control over the slave trade in the colonies and the wealth it generated. Now pay attention here. This group had a monopoly on British trade with West Africa, including gold, silver, and slaves. Thanks to England's war with the Netherlands, the original company collapsed under mounting debts in 1667. Re-emerging in 1672 with a new royal charter and a new name, the Royal African company. That same company from which Cambridge got its seed money. Family, when I and the certified voices of the new black media declare that we literally built the U.S. from the ground up, we mean it. And if we started examining the governments, businesses, and institutions worldwide that we jump-started with the capital generated from our ancestors' free labor, we would probably faint. The more we look, the more we see our money and influence all over the world. But I digress. Other dictionaries such as Merriam-Webster also changed some things over time. As you can see right here, the irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against homosexuality or homosexuals. Now for those who don't know, aversion is a feeling of repugnance towards something with a desire to avoid or turn from it. So while I may not 100% agree with the definition in 2009, at least it's closer to the truth. Now let's see what happened to the definition in 2016. Irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against homosexuality or homosexuals. Word for word the same. And again, I don't 100% agree with the definition, but at least it's closer to what we read earlier as far as phobias. Now let's see 2023. Irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against homosexuality or gay people. Slightly different. And now 2024. Discrimination against, aversion to, or fear of homosexuality or gay people. Notice the change, family. This is very subtle, but again, this is very revealing. Notice in the previous example, irrational fear of was listed first, which is more accurate. Now when you go to the definition, discrimination against is listed first. Also, the word irrational is gone, which, if you remember, is associated with anything pertaining to a phobia. So these are subtle changes, but there's a reason why they changed it. And this is more insidious than we think. And while it's not as dramatic as the switch in Cambridge, it still is very impactful. Shout out to that Wayback Machine from archive.org. I learned that from Professor Black Truth. If you notice, the further back we went, the closer we got to the real definition. So definitely watch out for these changes. Homeschool your children if you can. If you can't, debrief your children frequently. My suggestion would be to look for some good old dictionaries, preferably from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, back when these companies weren't playing so many games. I personally use a dictionary from the 60s on a regular basis, and the definitions are much clearer than the modern day ones. But anyway, hopefully this video has been helpful. Be one and be blessed, family. Peace.